look at electoral solutions. I have been an educator throughout my career. I've been a public school advocate throughout my career. And I believe that those two things make me a great deal more qualified than our current superintendent of public instruction.
Yes.
Yeah!
Yes.
So, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and my background. I started my career as a high school teacher. I taught algebra and geometry. They needed a math teacher. That wasn't my background, but that was what they needed. Eventually worked my way into social studies, but I was that teacher like many educators who had to, because of a lack of leadership or failure of leadership at state capitol, had to reach into my own pocket to buy school supplies for my students so that they could have the opportunities that they deserve to be successful. And because of that failed leadership at the Capitol, in my time as an educator, I have seen countless kids falling through the cracks because of a lack of resources in their schools. But I've also seen incredible, professional educators, experts in their field, who have done everything in their power to ensure that every child in their class had a chance to be successful. But it shouldn't be that hard. We should have elected leaders who are as invested in our future as our teachers are. And I became very frustrated, like a lot of educators out there. How many educators are in the room, by the way? Raise your hand if you've been an educator of any kind. All right, a lot of you. Like a lot of you, I became very frustrated with that lack of support from the state capitol for our students, for our teachers, for our schools, and for the future of our state. And so, in my district, my legislative district at that time was a Republican district. You guys know what that's like, don't you? You know what that's like to live in a Republican district, I think. Republican district, I had a 10-year incumbent Republican who had represented me in the state house in our district for a long time, 10 years. And I decided I was going to run for the legislature. I thought that the legislature needed the voice of a teacher. And everybody I knew tried to talk me out of it. I was 26 years old. It was the first election I was eligible to run for the state legislature. You have to be 25 in Arizona. I talked to lots of progressive folks in my community, and they said, David, you do not have a chance. I was the last of 8 candidates to get in that election, to get in that race. And again, a Republican district with a 10-year incumbent Republican. You know the power of incumbency. Very difficult to beat an incumbent. But I ignored the naysayers, or I used that as motivation. And I went and I knocked on 7,000 doors across my community, and I stood at people's doorsteps. And I had a very simple message. I said, my name is David Schapira, I am a teacher, and I believe that the legislature needs the voice of an educator. And it worked. With a lot of folks, a lot of households. And that election cycle in 2006, against a 10-year incumbent Republican in a Republican district, I won by 3,000 votes. We turned our district a bright shade of blue, and we never let it return to the public school detractors who had historically represented us. Yeah. Our district today is still a bright shade of blue because we talked to the folks in our community and we let them understand that it was the progressive candidates, it was the progressive elected officials that were fighting for the public schools in our community. And Tempe, which is where I live and where my district is and was, is a very pro-education community. Progressive, conservative, setting that aside, the community of Tempe understands the importance of quality public schools in every neighborhood. And so that's why we were able to accomplish this in our community, to change the makeup of our district, to change the elected representation in our community. I was re-elected to the state house. All 4 years in the house, I served on the appropriations committee and on the education committee. In my second term, I became the ranking member of the education committee. I was actually the only returning member, so I was literally at 28 years old, the senior most member of that committee. I then, in 2010, ran for the state senate and the school board at the same time. You can serve in the legislature and on a local school board, so I ran for the Tempe Union High School Governing Board because I wanted to have as much impact on schools as I could. I was elected to both offices the same day, to the state senate and to the school board, and the very next day I ran for a third office, which was to be the leader of the Democrats in the Arizona State Senate. I was a freshman, I was 30, but I thought, you know what, I think we need a new voice of leadership in our state legislature. Our voters in this state elected the smallest Democratic caucus in history. We had a 9-member caucus, and I said, you know what, I'm not willing to accept that. And so I ran for leadership because I wanted to turn things around. I was elected leader of the Democrats in the state Senate. At the time, I was the highest ranking Democrat in state government, which is more of a sad state of affairs because we didn't have any statewide elected officials. And we led the Democratic caucus in the legislature from a 9-member caucus to a 13-member caucus in one election cycle. We gained 4 seats, which was the largest increase in representation that any caucus had experienced in state history. And we did that in a few different ways. One, we held them accountable. We learned the difference. We learned when to throw stones and when to build bridges. And so we fought them tooth and nail on legislation like SB 1070. We fought them on Medicaid cuts. We're still fighting them on Medicaid cuts today, and now we're fighting it at the federal level. And we fought in the trenches every day for our public schools. And I'll tell you, Russell Pierce, a lot of you recognize that name. Russell Pierce, the sponsor of SB 1070, was the Senate president when I was the minority leader. I'm the only minority leader that ever had to deal with him as Senate president. Fortunately, we recalled him a year into my term, and so we got rid of him and changed that. But I served with people like Russell Pierce and Andy Biggs and Eddie Farnsworth, some of the folks that Amanda was alluding to who profited from the for-profit education complex. And one thing I learned in the legislature, I certainly didn't know at the beginning, was that I used to think that our public education system was in trouble because the folks at the state capitol didn't know or didn't understand or were ignorant to the idea that education is an important piece of our state's economy and of the future of our state. And I came to the realization that it's not ignorance, it's not lack of knowledge, it is intentional. Yeah. There is an intentional plan by our leaders at the state capitol, including Doug Ducey and Diane Douglas, our current state superintendent, who advocated for the private school voucher bill. This is the superintendent of public instruction. She is the leader of the public school system, and she advocated in favor of a bill to take money out of the system that she leads and to put it into for-profit private schools. It is an intentional plan. Well, I'll take questions in just a minute, if that's all right. It is an intentional plan to dismantle the public education system in New York. And let me tell you why, because that sounds like a crazy, outlandish criticism. But let me explain their school of thought. Andy Biggs once said to me, this guy's now a member of Congress, he was the Senate president. Andy Biggs once said to me that he doesn't believe that government should be in the business of education. It is an ideological belief. But I'll take it a step further. Folks like that, folks like Diane Douglas, they believe that education is a product to be bought and sold. It's a commodity. And that they think like Mitt Romney does, that you should get as much education as you can afford. And so they want to create a tiered system where you have these high-end, expensive private schools, like the one Amanda talked about, where they're charging upwards of $50,000 in some cases. Those are the schools that the rich folks can afford, and then the scraps left for everybody else. They don't understand, or they have other motivations, as I said. They have an intent to change the entire educational landscape. Now, I could go a step further and talk to you about some of the other reasons. I think the private prisons have something to do with it. The private prison industry in Arizona has a lot of influence in the state capitol. They've had a lot of influence over the last 2 governors, over members of the legislature. And who in society, in terms of corporate interest, benefits most from a poor school system? Private prisons. Private prisons. They profit a great deal from a poor education system, an under-resourced education system. So we have this really intentional plan out there. We have folks that believe that education is a product. The rest of us who recognize, like Amanda said, that education is a right. That educational opportunity is a founding principle of this country. Those of us who look at the famous poem inscribed at the base of the Statue of Liberty that says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free," and we hear an implied next sentence that says, "And when those tired and poor, huddled masses get here, we will provide them with the opportunity to live the American dream." And I get sick and tired, let me just tell you, I get sick and tired of people like Russell Pierce and Diane Douglas who say, well, you know what? the folks that want to come to this country and they want to live the American dream, you know what they need to do? They need to do what the rest of us have done. They just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. My response to that bootstrap argument is that education is the bootstrap by which we pull ourselves up. And if we're going to restore the opportunity in this state for people to live the American dream, we have to invest in our education system. We have the lowest per pupil spending in the nation, dead last. Our K through 8 educators, the ones who are serving our youngest kids that need that help early on, our K through 8 educators are the worst paid teachers in the country. We have a teacher shortage crisis in this state right now that is unprecedented, even for Arizona. It has never been this bad. And we have teachers leaving in droves, not just because of lack of funding and resources, not just because of bills like SB 1431, but because we passed a bill in the legislature this year, our leadership in the legislature passed a bill this year that says anybody with a pulse can be a teacher. Do you know how offensive that is to a person like me and others in this room who actually went to college to study pedagogy, to learn to be good educators, to say that virtually anybody can now be an educator and you get a certificate in the last 12 years and teach in Arizona? Now, I don't think anyone's going to take them up on that, to be frank. I don't think that bill's going to have any impact, because I don't know a lot of people out there with college degrees that want to go get one of these certificates that aren't worth the paper that they're printed on and go work for $24,000, $25,000 a year in some of these, especially rural communities that are starting at that salary. Even if they go work in the valley and they can start at $35,000, $36,000, $37,000 a year, there's a lot of jobs that pay a lot more to college graduates out there, right? So I don't think the bill's going to work. But let's say someone takes them up on it and goes and gets the cert. I don't think school districts, none of the ones that I know of, maybe there's some out there, are going to say, oh yeah, I'm going to hire someone who's never had any training on how to teach and put them in a classroom. Which, you know what, some districts are desperate, and they may do that. But what's going to happen next? They're going to quit after the first year. They are not going to last more than a year in those classrooms with no educational training. People who think the job is easy and then get there and realize it's not. It's a very difficult job. But that bill, what that does is that sends a clear message to educators around this state that our legislature has no respect for our profession. And you know, I heard Republicans in the legislature when I was there, they always talk about Finland. Oh my gosh, we gotta be more like the Finnish system. In Finland, teachers are revered. The people who are the top of their industry, they become educators. In this country, America has invented a lot of things. We've also invented that old saying, those who can't do, teach. And I'm tired of that. I'm tired of that mentality that is prevalent in our state legislature. And I'll tell you one other thing about the legislature that I learned when I was there. The folks in the state legislature, they typically defer to experts on things like transportation, healthcare, human services, and environment. When I say defer, they'll at least bring in experts and hear their testimony. They may ultimately disagree with them, but they at least consult with experts. But in education, every member of the legislature thinks they're an education expert. Why? Because they went to school.